and then we'll get started. Okay, perfect. Let's test this. Oh, yes. Okay, we love it when technology works. Hi, everybody. I'm Micalah Spenrath, Deputy Director of Policy and Energy at HARC, and today I'm going to talk to you about solar storage and public policy. Yes. Right here. Can y'all hear me? Okay. All right, so quick overview of content. Going to talk a little bit about my path to energy because it might be surprising to know I am not a lifelong energy professional. We're going to look at the benefits of solar, talk a little bit about the role of batteries, barriers to adoption of those technologies, the influence of policy, and of course, how you all can get involved. So a bit about me. I started my life just like many of you using energy. So my background is environmental science and engineering. No energy, really. But I know how to flip a switch, plug in a toaster, and use energy. So that's really where I started. Of course, I had environmental interests, didn't really want to use fossil fuels and things like that, but it wasn't clear how ingrained they are in our energy system until I got into this line of work. So after graduate school, I took a job advocating for policies, both legislative and regulatory, to expand market opportunities to clean energy businesses. Basically, I wanted to make it easier for clean energy companies to do business and deliver those clean electrons in the state of Texas. In my current role, I take more of an educational stance. So I provide the information and data they need to craft sound policy. And so now I just qualify myself as an energy professional, energy and environment, and leverage those skills whenever they're needed. Oh, let's see. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the benefits of solar energy. This might be too high level for some of you, but I wanted to make sure we were all speaking the same language. So lower electricity bills, that might be a given. So those can be direct savings based on a rooftop solar system that you have on your house. So you're actually not really buying electricity from your utility. Or it can be system-wide savings because of wider adoption of utility-scale solar across Texas. Greater system reliability. So we'll talk a little bit about how the grid operates, and having more supply online really helps reduce the risk of power outages, and solar is a great contributor to that. Energy security. So I'm pretty sure some of us have lived through power outages, maybe even thunderstorms, hurricanes, floods, things like that. And we know that if you have an energy system in your house, you're less likely to have a power outage, and you're more likely to recover quicker after you experience an outage. So when it comes to energy security at home, these systems are really valuable. And then I won't spend too much time on this because I think I'm preaching to the choir a bit, but lower emissions and environmental benefits include lower water consumption as opposed to natural gas generation, and of course, lower emissions. So more supply, greater system reliability. So you will see some graphs and charts throughout this presentation, but I'm hoping that I'll explain them enough to where they can be really accessible for everybody. So the grid is a balancing act. You really ideally want supply to always be greater than demand. So the purple line at the top is how much energy we have, capacity or energy available, and the blue line is demand or energy that's needed. And ideally never the two shall meet, because that's when we start to get load shed events or power outages, which is obviously detrimental. So solar really is one of the fastest forms of energy that we can interconnect and use. So as demand is rising, and it is rising, Texas uses a lot of energy, it behooves us to incorporate energy that we can build quickly and energize quickly, and solar is one of the best ways for us to do that. It takes about 2 years to get solar on the grid versus a natural gas plant, which might take 3, 4, 5, 6, depending on supply chain constraints. Yes.
Is that state of Texas?
Yes, this is actually from ERCOT. So this is specifically Texas. In fact, I think just about every single graph you'll see today is ERCOT, so Texas specific. Okay. So I'm not going to bury the lead here. Solar saves people money. So this is actual data from ERCOT on a particular day, January 1st, 2025. And so we have solar generation, that's kind of that white-yellow line, and then you have average energy cost in Texas. And for those of us that are a bit more technical, I used the LMP, so the locational marginal price of energy, averaged over the state. So you can see I have annotated when the sun rises and when it sets. There's a sun and a moon there. And so you can see as solar ramps up, we have a lot more generation during the day. No surprise, the sun is going to be out. You can see that there is a decrease in energy costs. In fact, it can get as low as zero. And sometimes we even see negative energy prices in ERCOT, which is amazing for our wallets. And solar is a huge contributor to that. So I won't keep this up too long, but as you can see, there's certainly lower energy costs coincident with solar use. So where do batteries come into this? Solar is great, we've covered that, but why do we need batteries? So this is ERCOT, this is our fuel mix. So I know there's a lot of colors going on, but one of the things you need to focus on is the yellow. So that's the amount of solar that we are generating on this particular day. I think it's May 3rd, 2025. So I tried to keep these relatively relevant time-wise. So the green line is wind, blue is natural gas, and so you can see that solar is really carrying us throughout the day. It really is a powerhouse of energy in the state of Texas, and that's one of the reasons why we can keep costs so low. Obviously, the second and third places go to wind and natural gas, not surprising there. But y'all might see the purple. So that's another resource that is extremely useful when the sun is rising or setting. And policymakers and grid operators at ERCOT, they really view those times of day when the sun is rising or setting as the highest risk in the grid. Solar has us covered throughout the day now. That's not really where we're experiencing constraints on the grid. It's really those handoff times when the sun is coming up or coming down that they typically see as high risk. But this particular resource in purple is greatly reducing, if not eliminating, that risk. And those are batteries. So many batteries are actually going to charge during the day when energy is cheap. So that's going to effectively allow us to store the sun and use it when it's not out. That can keep costs low, and it also acts as a bridge. So as wind and natural gas are ramping up and solar is ramping down, there is a handoff in these resources, and sometimes they don't match perfectly. And so instead of there being grid instability or cost instability at that time, now batteries fill that gap very easily because they're very dispatchable, and that keeps the grid reliable. So that's the benefit of batteries, and it's a huge win for grid reliability. All right, so barriers to solar and storage adoption. So just really high-level categories, upfront costs, right? So these systems are typically going to be capital intensive for businesses and for homeowners. So upfront cost is always going to be a concern when we're thinking about widespread adoption. We also think a lot about community opposition, especially in the policy space, because many of the policymakers, or all of them, have constituents that they are beholden to. And so where those communities stand in terms of these technologies really does hold weight. So that could be based on real concerns like safety, or unfortunately that opposition can be based on misinformation and unfortunately false campaigns and things like that, really muddying the waters. Grid constraints are another concern. So we can build and build and build. It doesn't really do us any good if we can't interconnect these resources to the system. And there are constraints to that. We won't go into that for this talk because it can get a little technical, but that is a limiting factor sometimes. And then of course, changing state and federal policy can really make it hard. So solar and energy companies really benefit from stable policy environments. It helps them make decisions, it helps them plan, and it helps them understand where investment needs to occur over the long time horizon, sometimes 10, 15, 20 years. And as you can imagine, policy might change in that time. So But having stability is one of the ways that a state or a market can signal to businesses that this is the place to bring your investment. It is the place to bring your product, clean energy, and it is the place to bring your jobs. So frequent changes in policies can have the opposite effect and actually depress business investment in a particular state. And for those of us who actually want to access clean energy, that can be depressing for us as well. So what is the role of policy in all of this? So don't feel like you have to memorize this. There's not going to be a quiz or anything at the end. This is really just to illustrate the complexity of the policy environment, really for anything, but specifically for solar or energy. So you have global policy that can look like treaties. Perhaps the Paris Climate Agreement might be ringing a bell. It can look like economic policy that's set at the World Bank. The international level, you can have exchanges between countries, carbon markets, electricity markets. You have national policies as well. So I'm sure many of us have been looking at tariffs or reading about tariffs, reading about Supreme Court rulings, reading about federal legislation changes. Those are all occurring at the national level. It's important to note that tariffs can also be international as well. And then you have the state. So that can look like permitting. So it can look like net metering, which is how or if we can compensate people for the energy that they provide back to the grid. A lot of states don't have that, and it's a barrier to solar adoption. You can also have a renewable portfolio standard, so the state can actually say to utilities, we want to decarbonize, make it happen. On the regional level, and I apologize, it's actually quite difficult to see, you can have wholesale markets. So Texas has ERCOT, but we also have SPP and MISO. So those are different markets that people can actually, well, not people, but businesses can actually operate in and sell their energy. At the county level, you can have zoning, you can have property tax incentives. At the city level, it can look like building codes and local programs. And then I didn't put it on here, but it occurred to me after, of course, I sent in the presentation that you can even have it at the neighborhood level. Your HOA can actually impact whether or not you adopt solar. Should they have that power? I think that's a debate for another time, but certainly I hope that that illustrates the complexity and how many different policies we need to be thinking about and different scales that we can be operating in. So I work primarily at the state level, but there are gains to be made at the global level, international level, and so on and so forth. So to drive this point home, what's the influence of policy? What can it actually do? It can result in faster connection for solar resources. So streamlining interconnection rules can really help homeowners and businesses get access to solar energy quickly. It can make the economics better. So solar energy can benefit from tax credits, lowering costs for businesses and homeowners. It can even shift our behavior. So state policy can drive clean energy adoption through carrots and sticks and really help people adopt it. And then it can also influence market participation. So at the end of the day, energy comes from businesses, and if they don't have a market, it's difficult to access those clean electrons. So creating a fair playing field within wholesale markets is key to advancing not only solar energy adoption, but also other emerging and innovative technologies. So just to kind of illustrate how important these can be, I do want to highlight the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm sure many of us know what it is, and if not, just a quick primer. It was a federal law that was passed in 2022, and the whole point was that it was going to provide historic investment with the goal of reducing inflation, cutting energy costs, and, in something that I was very proud to see, addressing climate change. So this included a robust package of tax incentives, grants, and other forms of funding for clean energy, energy efficiency, and things like that. So one of the effects of this policy, how powerful it was going to be, is illustrated by this graph. So this was actually published by the Rhodium Group, and it compared this policy, the IRA for the U.S., against what was needed to meet U.S. Paris Climate Agreement agreements, I suppose I should say. And as you can see, there is some overlap. So under the IRA, under an aggressive scenario, we could have actually been really on track to pair with what our commitment was. So some of you might have noticed that I'm using the past tense there. when referring to the IRA. And unfortunately, I'm very sad to announce that that policy has changed and it has shifted under the Trump administration and the Republican-led Congress. So what has changed? So just flagging for those that don't follow federal policy as much as I do. So the budget bill. So Congress has to pass a budget for the country to keep running, things like that. For this particular session, it was called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I refer to it as HR 1. And so that really removed a lot of the gains that we had made under the IRA. So changes in that policy, and of course, I can also highlight that they didn't just use legislation. President Trump also enacted executive orders that make it harder for clean energy to operate. And then they went so far as to cancel obligated programs and projects, which is really unprecedented for our country. So we really are living through a historic time. So changes in federal policy are anticipated to create or have created several effects. So the phase out of tax credits, changing economics, right? Disruption of energy projects, changing access, changing stability for businesses, cancellation of energy programs, destabilization, uncertainty for businesses, as we just discussed. So they might be less enthusiastic to build and have larger clean energy portfolios than they previously would have, and then increased energy costs. So I've been reading about the impact of some of these policies, and it seems that energy costs are going to increase, and it's going to outpace inflation, which is quite scary. All right, so how can you get involved? So stay informed. So that's one of the things that I really did not do before I got into energy. If you had asked me who the Public Utility Commission of Texas was, probably could not have told you. So please follow local energy news, updates from the PUC, trusted news outlets and the legislature, and depending on how technical you want to get, ERCOT as well. Engage locally, so you can actually facilitate change right where you're standing. A lot of the time it can happen in schools, businesses, and neighborhood projects. Make your voice heard, so contact city officials, state legislatures, and Congress about solar and storage policies. I cannot tell you how many times I've been speaking with a state representative, and they're like, we need stories. We need to hear from our constituents. Other than that, like, if you do not give them that, they don't have ammo to go into these negotiations. It really empowers them when you can say, I heard from my constituents XYZ, and that's why I'm taking such a hard line on this policy negotiation. Without that, maybe it's just their preference. Join civic efforts, so participate in local energy coalitions or attend public hearings. So Texas legislature, it meets every 2 years. So we're set for another one in 2027, and I hope to see y'all there. Definitely attend public hearings if you're able, and testify. That is your right. Take personal action. So for now, we still have some control over our energy choices. So explore rooftop solar or community solar programs. I think Austin Energy actually provides a renewable program if you want to subscribe exclusively to renewable energy. So that's a really good opportunity to contribute to clean energy at home. And just flagging that one of the clawbacks in HR 1 was the tax credit for rooftop solar. So as of right now, homeowners can have a 30% tax credit if they decide to install a rooftop solar system. That's going away in December. It was previously going to stay law of the land for several years in the future, but unfortunately, December's it. So just flagging that for anybody who's considering getting a solar system. Yes? Yes. So the question was, what are some of the trusted news outlets that people can subscribe to? I really like Canary Media. Utility Dive is very good, and of course NPR, covering energy as well. So those are the ones that I frequent, but the Houston Chronicle also does a lot of really good energy work as well. And Texas Monthly, it's not a huge focus for them, but every now and then they will cover policy. So those are some of the outlets that I would throw in the mix for y'all. And I'm not sponsored, so that's just based on my experience with them. Okay, so it's great to show up, but what are you going to be looking for, right? So if you're not steeped in policy, you might not know what you should be on the lookout for, what policies can be threatening or detrimental. And so I wanted to give y'all some kind of rules of thumb that you can use if you decide to engage more deeply in this space, so that you can feel more empowered. So policies to watch out for, things that change the economics for energy. So that could be increasing costs for solar and storage needlessly, right? Creating more hoops that they have to jump through, which increases costs. That's a problem. Things that devalue solar energy, right? So we had spoken about net metering. So basically compensating people for the energy they provide back to the grid. Some utilities might give you a fair market price. Others might shortchange you. And if they do shortchange you, then it's a disincentive for you to get solar on your home. So those are some things that you can be on the lookout for. Policies that change the market. So I had mentioned creating an even playing field, which is called the Texas competitive market, which is something we've really leaned into for the past 2 decades. That really has allowed solar to flourish. So any efforts to change that, to artificially create an uneven playing field that advantages one energy resource over the other, that's something that should catch your eye. Policies that change access. So it makes it harder for energy businesses to operate. Think red tape. Think more permitting. Think more restrictive regulation, but only for solar or only for batteries, right? If this is everybody, then that's one thing. But a lot of the time, we do see a lot of policy targeted specifically to clean energy. And it can also make it harder for Texans to access solar affordably. And then policies that change your ability to access information. So lack of accurate information about solar energy, its cost, its reliability, or safety can really hamper adoption as well. So policies that try to remove public information, remove your right to access data, those are some things to be on the lookout for. Okay. What was that? Okay. Oh, yeah. Yes, I know Cyrus. Yes, I can actually double click on that. I interacted with Cyrus quite frequently, and the Sierra Club is great at showing up. Cyrus does a wonderful job. So definitely think that the Sierra Club is a really great resource for that. And I just want to encourage everybody to have that same level of confidence when engaging with policymakers, because they work for you. They might forget that sometimes, but they do. All right, that's all I had for y'all. Happy to take any questions. Yes. Yeah, so the question is, can we address or talk about basically solar panels that you can buy at Home Depot? So apartment scale, basically plug and play solar systems. That is something that is gaining popularity abroad. I haven't seen it rolled out here, at least not at scale, but it could certainly be the future of solar. So instead of having a company come and install a permanent system on your roof, or permanent in that you can't remove it, you actually can just go to Home Depot or Lowe's or some other store, purchase some solar panels, plug it into your home, and then it operates the exact same way as if you had a permanent rooftop solar system. So it is quite innovative. I haven't seen it rolled out at scale in the US, but it is something that is gaining interest abroad.
May I add a little to that?
Yes, please.
There's actually an Austin company that is working that is selling those, but they are designed both in Europe and locally to have a relatively low capacity. You hang them on the balcony. I think it's 1,200 watts because if it's too much power, it could create a problem with the electrical wires. But Germany has literally millions of these installed with zero failures or problems or things. And in the U.S., Utah has passed legislation to make that legal, and the companies, of course, are working on that in the rest of the country to try to get this approved use. Now, in Europe, sometimes they just bite it and plug it in without going through the proper authorities. So, of course, as Europe, we would never.
Yeah, a utility is going to have an opinion. I'm sure Google can help us there. But that's certainly something to keep an eye out for, because when you have an innovative technology that you're trying to scale, that's when you're very susceptible and vulnerable to policy change. So that's something that we should all be aware of. And, they might try to introduce a bill that says your utility has to approve that for your house. That is going to remove your empowerment. It's going to remove your choice. It's going to create barriers for you. Because let's say that they make you do that and then there's a 2-year wait. So that is something that could happen. I'm hoping that it doesn't. But as you can see, that's what I'm constantly thinking of as someone in the policy space. How can policies incentivize and scale this technology? And how can it be used in the reverse? Yes?
Is there a name for that type of setup?
The
small setup?
The plug-in solar? I refer to it as plug-in solar. But yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yes?
Can you talk about the current state of battery technology? I think the most energy dense battery technology now is lithium ion. But can you talk about what's next especially for utility scale batteries?
Yeah, so the question is, what's next for utility scale batteries? You're correct in that lithium ion is kind of the ruling commercially available technology, but there's a lot of research going into alternatives. I haven't seen much in terms of commercial scale for those alternative technologies, but certainly an area of interest. In terms of what's next, what policymakers really want to see is increase in safety. So we saw a lot of bills in Texas specifically that was talking about their ability to catch fire. So if you talk to battery professionals, they'll let you know that under normal operational circumstances is quite remote. They don't just catch fire every year. They are quite safe, but either way, it is a community concern, right? So all of us might be very removed from that, but if your community is hosting some of these large battery systems and they do catch fire, as one did in Texas, which is what caused all of this, then it is a real concern, and policymakers have responded to it. Now, we don't want to overcorrect, right? We don't want to say no more batteries just because of one incident, which unfortunately can happen in the Capitol. So what's next for that technology? Safety, I think, is going to be a big one. Maybe not so much shoring up additional safety, because as I said, the technology is rather safe, but convincing policymakers and community members that it is safe. So really doing that community engagement, that government relations, that's going to be very important. And then, of course, research to increase duration. So these systems, I think we're up to a few days for the large batteries. But sometimes policymakers want to see even longer durations. I think a common goal is a week or more. So getting the technology to scale where we can have a week's worth of solar energy stored in a battery would be ideal. So I know that companies are working on that. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question. I guess I'm still confused about like how do we like now change what are the best forms? Like say like do I bring some of the stuff up at city council meetings or what are the local avenues for us to like get involved in like advocating and stuff?
Yeah, so city officials are a great start. Your local commissioners, city commissioners, they're going to be a really good place to start as well. So the closer they are to you, it's easier for you to interface with them. And local actions tend to have a more significant or noticeable impact on our day-to-day lives. So it's very reasonable for you to start there. However, the state legislature has been moving more towards trying to consolidate a bit more authority at the state level. So a great example is Houston. So Houston has a lot to do with climate action plans and things like that, and the state has kind of reasserted its authority over certain aspects of city processes. So given that trend, I do want to highlight that it is worthwhile and worth your time to engage with state lawmakers as well. Right now, federal level might not be the best use of your time unless you're a constituent of a Republican member of Congress. And that's just an unfortunate truth. Not to say that you should not contact your representative if they are a Democrat, but unfortunately their ability to progress legislation is quite limited right now. Yes?
I have something we have a petition that we're going to get people to sign at Sunday. We can sign it tonight if you wish. It is calling for the city of Austin to put solar on all of the city buildings which are large enough for it to be a good thing, and to build it into all future buildings. In other words, when they do a bond, to add the cost of that solar panels into the whole thing. And but we have some support in the council of that. So we would love for people to sign this, and so I'm going to get these passed around.
Thanks, Bob. Yes? Mm-hmm.
What would go on a homeowner's roof to speed up the process of getting solar, because sometimes it apparently is slow. I don't think that's necessarily true for Austin Energy, at least on that end. It might be slow for them to do the actual, after it's on the roof, and then they come back to approve.
Yeah.
But I did, even though I was at the press conference and I was supportive, I still didn't get a good sense of how slowly some of these other energy companies in the state could be, and why it was so important to have that.
Yeah, so quizzing me on the bill number, can't answer that, but I think it was carried. No, no, you're fine, but I believe it was carried by Phil King in the Senate. So at Phil King, I believe it was carried by Phil King in the Senate. I can't remember who carried it in the House, But yes, I am familiar with that bill. I was watching it very closely because it is a boon to DERs, so distributed energy resources. So I refer to them throughout today as rooftop solar and home batteries, but we typically just say DERs. And so, yes, I personally do think it will be a boon to those systems. Why is that? Because it gets back to the idea of a wait time. So homeowners should be able to contract and get their system certified, but under the previous regulation, they had to wait for one entity. And think about the volume in Austin alone. So you could be waiting, I think it was weeks to months, and you might lose your motivation during that time. So I think the goal here was to expedite permitting of these systems, which is, I personally think, the right direction for the state to go in. And it was really remarkable because in the hearing, I believe Phil King shared his own personal experience trying to get a battery system into his home. And so having a Texas lawmaker sharing personal stories about how the system does not work if you want a DER, if you want your own system in your house, energy independence, security, control, I thought that was very powerful. Yeah.
Maybe also energy does have a problem. I don't know. I got the impression that it was less problematic than some other do you have an idea of the rate? I mean, it sounds like you're saying it could be months. Do you think that some of these private electric utilities are deliberately trying to not be, or is it just simply they need to hire people?
I certainly couldn't weigh in. I'm not familiar with every utility in Texas. That's quite a list. But what I will say is that that's one of the benefits of having a state policy, is that you can get around a lot of that lack of standardization to make sure that every Texan can have a similar experience regardless of what their utility wants to do. So there is a benefit to having a state level policy, and usually one of the benefits is that standardization. I think I saw a hand earlier. Oh, yes. Yeah, so that came up in the session. So that's a huge community concern. So I forget the name of the town, but I believe it was a rural community, and they actually have a dumping yard for, I think it was wind turbines specifically. It was causing a lot of issues. And basically what had happened was there was this policy gap that allowed companies to abdicate responsibility for the responsible disposal of these systems. And so they literally just piled them in a yard in a particular community, and the community had no ability to remediate that. So the lawmaker actually introduced, and I believe passed, a bill that increases responsibility for businesses, and it makes it harder for them to just walk away. So that's responsible decommissioning, and it was widely regarded as cleaning up the industry, and even industry was supportive. So that's a little bit about that, but yeah, that is certainly something that we talk about on the Capitol. Okay, I don't know how much time we have. What'd you say? Okay, so let's see. Let's do maybe two more. Yes?
So what about home batteries? Are there incentives for that? Is that something that is helpful to, will that save you money in your home? Will that help the grid?
Yeah. So the question is, home batteries, will they save you money? Will they help the grid? The answer is yes to both. So one of the benefits of having these systems is it would allow you to participate in what we call a virtual power plant. So I don't want to go too into the weeds on that, but essentially the concept is that you would have this area, a lot of different batteries or DERs in that system, and ERCOT would be able to aggregate all of those and treat you like a power plant. So it would call upon your energy when it needs, instead of having to fire up, per se, a natural gas plant. So it's a cleaner alternative, and they would pay you for that. So they would compensate you for the energy that you're providing to the grid because it is a grid benefit. And so that can do wonders in terms of energy equity. It can do wonders in terms of expediting a return on investment for these systems for homeowners. And it can be an incentive, right? So you can actually be making money, not just saving money, but making money on these energy systems. So that's one of the ways that it provides a grid service, is if you're able to do that. And ERCOT is, they do have a virtual power plant program. So for those of us that were unfamiliar, that is an effort that's ongoing. It is primarily targeted at larger DERs, so commercial and industrial, but I'm hopeful that residential will be better represented in the future. And then in terms of saving you money, yes, they will. So storing your solar energy for further use. Yeah.
Are there savings available today for homeowners?
I'm not 100% sure. I want to say yes, but they might be changing based on some of the... Yes, Tesla. So there are private programs as well. That's their own, yes. But not everybody can afford a Tesla battery. So just wanted to flag that. Sunrun. So they have a battery system. I couldn't tell you. Yeah. I'm a policy person. Yeah, no worries. But yeah. Okay. Did I miss any questions in the back? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Time of use rates, very, very useful. Utilities oppose, as I'm sure you know. So what is a time of use rate? So that gets to the core of consumer behavior. So a utility might want to incentivize you to, for example, charge your EV at a specific time of day. And if they can count on you to do that, they can increase situational awareness of the grid. It's more predictable for them. It's easier for them to manage those assets. And so they can actually implement a time of use rate. And so they'll give you a discount if you actually charge during that time. It was something that we considered heavily for school buses. In fact, in my previous career as an advocate, we introduced a bill specifically for that, and we were working with the utilities. Unfortunately, we got hung up on a certain thing and we weren't able to get it over the finish line. But yes, time of use rates, it is a tool that can really incentivize adoption and make it easier. In my opinion, it could be a win-win for both the utility and the consumer with some of these assets. But as far as I'm aware, I don't think there's any requirement for them to have that. It's optional at this point. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll see how that evolves over time. But yes, certainly something to keep an eye on. Okay. All right, guys. I think I'll call it there. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak and for all the great questions.